Hi, Robert Burris here. I'm back for some studies that I've been doing and that I would put under the category of theology, including a study of postmodernism. And I've decided to put direct study of the emergent church to rest. There's plenty of opportunities to talk about it and along other lines of study, but it rubs me the wrong way too much. And obviously, I become rather hostile, and it just aggravates me, even physically. I suppose I should get something out of the way here. You undoubtedly see that I'm wearing something a little unusual. It's not a prop. Um, you might want to know that this is a 357 Magnum revolver. Every video I've made, I am armed, and it's because I am normally armed. And just because you see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Um, and some days I like this chest rig with a nice 357 in it. And I'm not going to take it off just because someone watching may have certain delicate sensibilities. My domicile is my castle. And a strong man armed keepeth his house. I intend to defend it. Um, you may be oblivious to the fact that home invasions occur, that, at almost any hour of the day, uh, people, um, criminals are afoot, basically. Let's put it that way. All right. Well, anyway, let's get to this. I thought the last video where I was discussing the descent of evangelicalism into a consultation with theosophists should be continued in looking at the source of this man's Donald Hoke, who led these consultations, facilitated them, dealing with what he says blew his mind. And this is a copy of a document that he forms his thinking around in that matter, and that is the Limits to Growth report for the Club of Rome's project on the predicament of mankind. I'd like to just start looking at the words that these doomsayers were using that captured this supposedly man of God, this faithful evangelical pastor. What blew his mind and got him off on this path where he felt like he needed to bring in secularists and theosophists in to consult with to give the church a plan for the future. And actually, some of the very words that Hoke used in his introduction come straight out of this report. So I'm going to start reading the forward here. I'm going to try not to keep interrupting. I'm going to try. In April 1968, a group of 30 individuals from 10 countries, scientists and educators, economists, humanists, industrialists, and national and international civil servants gathered in the Accademia di Linensi in Rome. They met at the at the instigation of Dr. Aurelio Pecci, an Italian industrial manager, economist, and man of vision. Um, this term man-o-vision speaks volumes to me, but I'll refrain from making too much comment right now. To discuss a subject of staggering scope, the present and future predicament of man. So the premise is man's in trouble. Let's address it. Out of this meeting grew the Club of Rome, an informal organization that has been aptly described as an invisible college. That's very interesting language. Its purposes are to foster understanding of the varied but interdependent components, economic, political, natural, and social, that make up the global system. This is 1971. It's published in 1972. I'm speaking in the latter part of the year 2011, 40 years hence, removed. And we're looking at this moment in time in which I'm making this video at the threat of a global government increasingly beginning to overshadow the independent sovereign government around which this nation, the United States of America, was formed. So I live in a time of increasing threat of globalism, the world moving in, telling me how to live. Rather Orwellian proposition. The global system in which we all live. 40 years ago, wow. See, yeah, these guys were convinced that, the world needed to be brought increasingly under a system. As a matter of fact, for them, it already existed, and they just, they're just here to help. Global system in which we all live, to bring that new understanding to the attention of policymakers and the public worldwide. So these guys were visionaries of a scheme to globalize the world, to institute world government, one world government, a new world order. The Club of Rome remains an informal, it's just an informal bunch of friends getting together, international association with membership that has grown to approximately 70 persons. Boy, there's churches that are way bigger than that. 70 persons of 25 nationalities. The question ought to be is, I know many people haven't heard of this. How did this become so influential on in the evangelical world, which comprised a much bigger body in the United States? How, oh how. 25 nationalities. None of its members holds public office, nor does the group seek to express any single ideological, political, or national point of view. BS. I'm not doing very good, am I, in interjecting BS. This is all about saying the world's in trouble, there's too many people, we need global government to institute the kind of controls that are necessary to further the existence of mankind and save the planet. 1972. All right. So they're saying, we don't have any agenda, more or less. All are united, however, by their overriding conviction that major problems facing mankind are of such complexity and so interrelated that traditional institutions and policies are no longer able to cope with them. nor even to come to grips with their full content. The members of the Club of Rome have backgrounds as varied. This is so postmodern in my estimation. So far, I mean, because I am critical of this, and I receive it with a certain amount of hindsight. Having seen what's transgressed or progressed over these last 40 years, seeing that this is amounts to quite a bit of hype. I just can't read it, and take it as anything but just bold-faced propaganda. And the language is it's all rhetoric. The members of the Club of Rome have backgrounds as varied as their nationalities. Dr. Pecky, still the prime moving force within the group, is affiliated with Fiat and Olivetti and manages, I guess, what is that, the Italian car manufacturer? Manages a consulting firm for economic and engineering development. Ital Consult, one of the largest of its kind, I guess that's the name of his firm, Ital Consult, largest of its kind in Europe. Other leaders of the Club of Rome include Hugo Thyman, head of the Bettel Institute in Geneva; Alexander King is scientific director of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development; Saburo Okita, head of the Japan Economic Research Center in Tokyo; Edouard Pestel of the Technical University of Hanover, Germany; and Carol Wilson of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Although membership in the Club of Rome is limited and will not exceed 100, it's going to be very elite. It is being expanded to include representatives of an ever greater variety of cultures, nationalities, and value systems. Again, it's a proposition to forge New World Order. And that is important, that one not forget that. These are people who consider themselves intellectual elites getting together, saying the world needs to be saved, and they've got a plan to save it. Or at least they want to have a discussion about a plan to save it. A series of meetings, the Club of Rome, culminated in the decision to initiate a remarkably ambitious undertaking, the project on the predicament of mankind. The intent of the project is to examine the complex of problems troubling men of all nations, poverty, in the midst of plenty. The dialectic is just being spun here, and some of the pillars of 1984 Orwellian language come into play. Poverty is plenty, that sort of thing. War is peace. Problems troubling men of all nations. Poverty in the midst of plenty, degradation of the environment, loss of faith in institutions. The purveyors of postmodernism, one of the things they complain about the most is the loss of truth. I mean, at least in the spinning of the rhetoric, there's always, an undercurrent of bemoaning the loss of truth and loss of certainty, which is actually a sin under postmodernism, but, let's not allow confusion to dissuade us from following the plan. Loss of faith in institutions, uncontrolled urban spread. We should be living in nice big bubble cities, crowded in like rats. Insecurity of employment, alienation of youth, rejection of traditional values, and inflation and other monetary economic disruptions. I'm just not doing very well in refraining from interjecting. In 2011, we're facing what seems to be almost inescapable economic collapse in America. That's probably overstating it. Our debt is in the $15 trillion range. We're spending more than we take in America in terms of our national government. Many local governments are in financial trouble. We've just been idiots in decades. But this was engineered crisis, and this mention of inflation is part of the problem. Basically, what's happened is we've allowed banksters, our government, in a fascist alliance with bankers, who are more like thugs than they are honorable men, are basically bleeding the wealth of America away through the Federal Reserve System. And the fascist allegiance that our government has with that, and allowing them to set monetary policy. And what they've done is they've constantly inflated our currency, devaluing it, pumping it full of air, if you will. And that's the problem. And because the value of the currency is lowered, devalued, prices go up, and the word inflation describes it beautifully. Why is this a crisis? Well, it's a manufactured crisis. It would not be a crisis. And okay, well, let's real quick. Why do the banksters running the Federal Reserve constantly inflate the currency? Well, the reason is because they want to avoid deflation. Deflation and inflation would occur naturally in an economy. But it'd be a natural cyclical thing, much like flooding of rivers, in response to increased precipitation, changes in climate. There's much that happens naturally. And a smart man wouldn't build his house right next to the river knowing that someday a flood's going to come. He would be smarter than that. Similarly, inflation, deflation are part of a natural cycle. And what's our government has been doing through the banksters is proposing that they can avoid deflation. Well, why would they want to avoid deflation? Deflation puts economic power into the hands of people holding the currency. I can't even go into all of this right now, but basically that means the public. In other words, if I have savings, I'm holding currency, that's mine. And if it's in a bank, the bank gets use of it to loan out to other people on a 10-to-1 ratio, by the way. Actually, it's even greater than that now. They've gone hog wild. The reserve ratio is just, it's for all intents and purposes, it's not even being honored. And that's a huge part of the problem. That's postmodern economics. Anyway, but as a holder of currency, in times of deflation, conversely, the dollar is not devalued, it increases in value, meaning my money has greater purchasing power. That means that the power, the economics is on my side at that point. And so, and then conversely, it's works against the money powers who have invested capital into huge inventories and huge purchases of goods. So the money powers holding huge amounts of capital can uh, buffer themselves against loss in part by constantly inflating the currency, making sure that deflation never encroaches upon their realm, meaning masses of people like myself with more powerful dollars to gain. It's hard to even talk about this and not simplify it, oversimplify it. But that's basically the picture. They're trying to avoid inflation. And I encourage you to study economics um, and find out. My generation was diseducated in public schools, and I had to learn about these things through a school of hard knocks. Having 2008, having me, like millions of Americans, had some savings in retirement, which was locked up in the stock market, a system that basically is instituted by our government, to help us avoid taxation. But it's like a trap that was laid by the money powers to make sure that all of my paper money was in paper, and make sure that on paper they had a means of manipulating the system in their favor. So many of us in 2008 lost on paper half of our retirement savings through what's commonly called the housing bubble. It is a very complex system. Again, I can't deal with it all here. But that is what propelled me into a study of economics and to find out, why, um, how that could happen. How could I possibly, if the, people running our economy are that honest and that smart, how could this happen? Where, anyway, there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of politics, a lot of mythology that's currently, you know, in the public square about all of that. But that's the bottom line. Our government has been in a fascist alliance with bankers for a good long time, and the system is not in our favor, and that, in my mind, that needs to be changed. But what's interesting is these guys, these elite characters, I believe, know exactly uh, where inflation comes from. These guys were not stooges; they knew, but they're spinning rhetoric here. So when he don't tell me, Mister Elitist, Mister Pecci, or and whoever, don't cry about inflation and tell me it's part of this mystical predicament of mankind, and that you're held here to save the day. BS. BS. Rejection of traditional values and the inflation and other monetary and economic disruptions. These seemingly divergent parts of the global world, and they introduce this term that they keep using, world problematique. My Kindle keeps going to sleep here. The screen keeps fading out. Um, as the Club of Rome calls it, have three characteristics in common. They occur to some degree in all societies. They contain technical, social, and economic political elements. And most important of all, they interact. Uh, what's happening here is a spinning of crisis to mold certain facts into a mystical crisis that requires a solution. And of course, you know, they're not saying they have the solution, but they think they can do a pretty good job of coming up with one. This is a propaganda piece to convince the world that there's a problem in need of a solution, a very overarching problem, a problem that you might say that where God has failed us, and you know we're going to have to bail ourselves out. It is the predicament of mankind that man can perceive the problematique, yet, despite his considerable knowledge and skills, he does not understand the origins. Yeah, a lot of diseducated public school stooges like myself were not equipped to understand what's going on, even though I was a child in the 70s, and certainly not of age to either embrace this or oppose it. But this has been the ethos that's been handed down to me, and I can recognize that, and I reject it now. And I think that's the reason I'm studying it, is I'm understanding the elements that have gone into this, the stew of Marxism, the postmodern ethic, uh, which again here is basically words are a weapon. It's rhetoric, and this was spun against the common man to herd him into a globalist mentality. Getting in a little bit of trouble with the page turner here. It's a little too sensitive. Or I'm a little too numb and sensitive to operate it correctly. Many components, and thus is unable to devise effective. He does not understand the origins, significance, and interrelationship of its many, components, and thus is not able to devise effective responses. The part I just kind of stuck in there unconsciously. He does not understand the origin, significance, and interrelationships of its many components, and thus is unable to devise effective responses. Again, this is the common man they're talking about, but, of course, why would they bother writing this unless they say they have a solution? But their job is to convince us. Our job as stooges is to embrace what they're saying, take it verbatim, and say, yeah, come in, help me, I need a savior. This failure occurs in large part because we continue to examine single items. Oh, yeah, we're not focusing on the big picture. That's the problem. Single items in the problematique without understanding that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, that change in one element means change in others. It's too complex. That's our problem. Phase 1 of the project of the predicament of mankind took definite shape at meetings held in the summer of 1970 in Bern, Switzerland, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. At a 2-week conference in Cambridge, Professor J. Forrester of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, presented a global model that permitted clear identification of many specific components of the problematique and suggested technical or technique for analyzing the behavior and relationships of most of the important components. Basically computer modeling, that's what they're talking about. Let me just mention here, I've even in the age of computerization, which is in its basis and its origin antithetical to mysticism, we've become so stoogified in this country and in the world at large that now just the inclusion of computation in studies, what have you, research, has this mystical, appeal to diseducated masses. And I just want to briefly mention, I've mentioned in other videos that maybe I didn't mention it so much. I've had arguments with Darwinists over the issue of the origin of life, and chastise them for this popular adoption of this panspermia theory. ET did it. So we're not going to be able to prove life, originated on Earth because ET brought it here, and let's not worry about the physics, and what not why. Let's not worry about the problems why we can't do it. We're just going to say ET probably brought it here, and I just think that's hilarious, ridiculous, and so then I've had these idiots that want to argue for Darwinism and still uphold the ridiculous failure of it, point me to articles about, because I challenge them, you have to prove the existence of these quote-unquote self-replicating molecules. You have to prove this, And so for these idiots, they point me to articles about computer modeling that's used as a tool to assess the viability of a theory, but it's still a theory. It's not proof of anything. Just because a computer says something, and who creates computers? They don't create themselves. Again, so if I create a video game, is that reality? No, it's not. But diseducated idiots who think they're very smart and think I'm very stupid are trying to tell me that a computer model is proof of the reality of something. Poppycock. They earn the name Stooges. Yeah, I'm hostile to this. It's just full of rhetoric. Jay Forrester of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, presented a global model that permitted clear identification of many of the specific components of the problematique and suggested a technique for analyzing the behavior and relationships of most of those components. This presentation led to an initiation of Phase 1 at MIT, where the pioneering work of Professor Forrester and others in the field of system dynamics had created a body of expertise originally suited to the research demands. The Phase 1 study was conducted by an international team under the direction of Professor Dennis Meadows, who was one of the co-authors of this propaganda piece here, Limits to Growth. Under the direction of Professor Dennis Meadows with the financial support from the Volkswagen Foundation. The team examined 5 basic factors that determined. Now, what's interesting about this is they got this huge complex problem, and it's very logical that you want to break it down into bite-sized pieces you can deal with. I guess I shouldn't complain about that, but in my mind, it's a kind of a certain double talk at play that just kind of makes me perk up and try to find contradiction. I guess there is not a contradiction in that by itself. So I'll move on. Down, boy, down. The team examined 5 basic factors and determined, therefore, ultimately limit growth on this planet. So this is the birth of, or at least a good milepost in the present that marks the present transformation or the present development of the logos that we're living in now, where the word "save the planet" is such a popular deal that the Earth is dying. And don't get me started. Um, the growth of this planet, population, agricultural production, natural resources, industrial production, and pollution. The research has now been completed, and this book is the first account of the findings published for general readership. So again, please understand this, and this book is freely available on the internet. I got it as a PDF file, and I've got a or at least a paperback copy coming that I've purchased. And none of these books that I've gotten, these older books, are expensive at all. Just a few dollars. I don't know why I didn't get them before. I guess I just wasn't really ready and passionate enough, and obviously got some passion working here to study this and to talk about it with other people. Um, but this is clearly an attempt to forge a global system under the banner of this huge problem that facing mankind, and it's very um, oriented towards economics and environmentalism, and with the underlying Marxism driving it. It is with genuine pride and pleasure that the Potomac Associates, referring to Washington, D.C. area, joins with the Club of Rome and who also produced this report, Potomac Associates, joins with the Club of Rome and the MIT research team in the publication of The Limits to Growth. We, like the Club of Rome, are a young organization, new. This is new globalism, new world order. And we believe the club's goals are very close to our own. Our purpose is to bring new ideas and new analysis and new approaches to persistent problems, both national. These problems they're talking about. They're actually very old points of discontent, uh, but for some reason, in trying to build a movement, stuff always has to be new. It always has to be new and urgent. And why have a try to invite a vigorous discussion about old problems, stuff that's been hashed and rehashed through centuries. No, this is new. New problems, both natural and international, and the only way this works is in a age of global communication. So that's what kind of gives rise to this kind of movement. This global movement is global communication. New analysis, new approaches to persistent problems, both national and international, to the attention of those who care about and help determine the quality and direction of our life. It's utopian, mystical, but these people behind this aren't mystics, really. I mean, their language is mystical, their thinking seems to be mystical, but not at all. They're very practical, pragmatic, and the language is for you. The rhetoric is for you, dear stooge, to embrace. It's false messianism. It's I won't say the word antichrist. Well, no, wait a minute. I just said it, didn't I? But it's because it is a theological proposition. Mankind is alone in the universe. He's got to solve these problems, and now we're getting to the point where all these old problems are too huge for us to ignore, and we're too limited in our thinking. But so let's devise a plan. We hope that I didn't finish that paragraph. Sorry about that. Direction, quality of life. We are delighted, therefore, to make this bold and impressive work available through our book program, which is a ministry of theirs. This is very religious in a very secular context. We hope that limits to growth will command critical attention. I don't know. Do you really want to submit to scrutiny? Command critical attention and spark debate in all societies. We hope that it will encourage each reader to think through the consequences. Think through the consequences, dear reader. Don't question the consequences. Just think through them. Don't question the problematique. Focus on the consequences of continuing to create growth to equate growth with progress. That right there, that is volumes. Again, call me a zealot. And yes, there, no doubt that I can't argue against the fact that there must be some limit to the earth's resources, but yet, as a Christian, my God is the creator of the universe, and He is able to provide. And that's not a mystical statement. It's not a statement of blind faith. What's amazing is even in 2011, people talk about overpopulation. Yet I'm living in Iowa. I can get on the interstate and drive, and we've got significant patches of land. Yes, it's owned, it's being farmed, it's being used, but it isn't crowded with habitations. And actually, our government is paying farmers not to use their land to grow things. So the crisis, this whole proposition, and yet you hear people talk about the overpopulation. Back in 1972, and I had to look up the figures. I meant to do that. When the population was less, considerably less than it is now, they were worried about overpopulation, limits to growth, and they were predicting within 20 years it was going to be a tremendous crisis, and the time for action was done. And here we are, and I think I remember seeing a news article where they decided, and again through calculations, that so it's not a hard figure that you can say it's a done deal, but that the 7th billion person was, they figure, born recently, so that the world population is 7 billion now, and it was considerably less, because I think later on here they actually try to say that within just a few decades that the population would double. So it'd be interesting to see what the population was then. See, but there's vast areas of open land. We're not producing at capacity. Resources needed for life. Not to discount water issues, but we're not at crisis with that either. So we are, the beneficiaries of God's grace, and with many resources that we can exploit. And so, this crisis is just largely manufactured. Anyway, I should finish this up. Just a few more words. God help me to get there. And we hope that it will lead to thoughtful men and women in all fields of endeavor to consider the need for concerted action now if we are to preserve the habitability of this planet for ourselves and our children. Um, that's kind of interesting because environmentalism that was that has grown from this type of reasoning, this mentality, which um, wasn't, they didn't even say that they were at the point of no return back then. They were saying we're coming up to a point where we're not going to be able to solve the problem if we don't act now. That was the deal. Propaganda um, to convince us that there was a huge crisis looming if we didn't act. We didn't forge a new world order. You're not going to get this on TV, folks. No charge. Yeah, I guess apparently I'm learning I get kind of congestion when I get my dander gets up and I get excited. But this is the mind-blowing stuff. This is just a taste of the mind-blowing stuff that got Mr. Donald Hoke all up in arms and wanting to call church leaders into a big meeting and forge a new agenda for evangelicalism. It's just dripping with Marxism. Marx was the atheist against God. His whole thing was about man being in predicament, needing to forge a new system, supposedly instituting classless society, equality for all, a utopia. But if you study Marx, basically he said what had to come first. Well, he figured supposedly that things would just kind of come to crisis on their own and things would collapse and we'd need a new system. But other than that, he said the other way to do it is revolution. And he spoke about revolution a great deal, which including a lot of bloodshed that would be necessary for this new glorious system. And actually, he became so desirous of developing that as a workable approach that he actually, Marxism has descended into a certain dialectic plan to forge the new system through ever increasing conflict, or at least whirlwinds of conflict. I don't have time to develop that now, but that's basically the idea. Always Hegel's proposal was, as opposed to Plato. Plato said truth and its antithesis in conversation with one another will reveal themselves, and truth will attract people. I'm kind of paraphrasing, maybe putting a few words in Plato's mouth, but basically saying that truth and lies will be revealed, and people, ought to go to truth. And Hegel said, well, no, you have truth and lies or antithesis, thesis, antithesis come together. And the way history progresses is that you resolve the contradictions between them, and you got a new truth, and you go from there. The new truth, the synthesis, becomes the new thesis, and you've got this progression. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which is the new thesis, and you've got this circle of. He didn't see it that way. He saw it as a linear thing, but it should not be hard to see this advocacy of a circular mentality there. As a matter of fact, he even talked about terms or dealt with the idea of concrete and abstract thought, and how, at least in the Marxists, say that Hegel, um, and I've not studied Hegel directly as much as I ought to, but the Marxists say, well, Hegel's idea of a cognitive construction was um, concrete, or no, abstract leading to concrete leading to abstract. You know, uh, it's kind of like, it's a little problematic for me to get that quite right. Um, because I'm working kind of backwards from the Marxist construction. The Marxist construction is concrete, abstract, concrete. So I always refer to that. I have to get that, bring that to mind to remember what the Hegelian one is, because Marx said Hegel was standing on his head, and he proposed to turn Hegel right side up. So that was Marx's view of Hegel's philosophy, was that it was upside down, and that Hegel needed Marx to turn him right side up. And what's interesting about that is basically Marxism uh, brings um, thinking, the process of thinking, into the realm of being beholden to abstract thought. I'm probably not expressing that well, but that's basically, the gist of it. Where so Hegelianism led to um, I'm struggling for the words. Uh, Inductive reasoning. In other words, it's a form of reasoning that is very reliant on intuition, um, theorizing. Um, that's what's supposed to, in Hegel's mind, drive knowledge forward, which, is, I would say, is rather antithetical to the classical view of the progression of thought, progression of human understanding. Um, Marx embraced that with a vengeance, but he put the emphasis on abstract thought more than he doubled down on it. And therefore, Marx doesn't really care about the results of his social experiments. Because, yeah, it may be a failure, but that doesn't mean the theory has failed. And so Marxists can always blame, a scapegoat for the failure of their social experiments. But yet, the theory is so mystical and wonderful and beautiful that it just demands to be repeated, demands to be tested. Uh, so, I guess what I mean to say is that, Marxism is the big element in this environmental movement. And Dr. Stephen Hicks covers that pretty good in his treatise on postmodernism. Question for Christians: how in the world could Christians embrace all of this as if God was the author of confusion, and think that they would use it as a springboard to plan for the future? Well, that's the part I really want to get into. But that Club of Rome thing is worth reading and getting to know, so that one can understand the evil that's about to enter evangelical churches through the Billy Graham organization in 1972, or in the 1970s. 1977 actually for them. So there's a few years that transpired. Well, I think I'll break this one off. Again, I've already spent an hour. I'm not even going to talk about trying to edit this because I don't have the time to try to pick through it. I'm rough. I am what I am. uh, get the books, read for yourself. Think critically.